You went to one of the hottest startups in the world at that time, Uber. From there, you went to Dunzo. After Dunzo, you said, I'm going to Kunal Shah's new startup.
Yeah, CRED.
Fucking crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Where did things go wrong for Dunzo?
Capital was, right?
This can also kill businesses, right?
100%.
I remember the first time we met, we spoke about Uber because you were still there. And then you said Uber would turn profitable in next year. So today I went and checked Uber's latest India report. They're at 311 CR loss. So that's
No
where they
comment.
are. Why coffee in a tea drinking country? Within coffee, why cold brew and not milk? Within that, why cold and not hot?
When we launched, we were absolute purists. There were only 4 people buying the product. There was Vardhman, his wife, my wife, and me.
A lot of mistakes in the process, right?
I think a lot of learning.
So what's next for Bonomi?
We're actually no longer in the coffee business. We're in the real estate business.
Damn glad, dude, that you agreed to do this. I think chased you for what, 1.5 years? Even before I started the podcast. 6 months before I started, I was like, okay, you want to do this? And then you were like, yeah. And then you were like, no. So I think it's taken 18 months, 1 year since the time I started at least.
Right. I don't remember the yes or the no, to be honest. But yeah, very, very excited to do this today to possibly maybe give out some truth bombs that might be helpful to people watching.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, I don't know if I've told you this, but you are one of those people who's had, I think, one of the biggest influences on me, the way I run Wirality. I think 2018, I remember the first time we met, we spoke about Uber because you were still there.
Yeah.
And then you said Uber would turn profitable in next year. So today I went and checked Uber's latest India report. They're at 311 CR loss. Okay. So that's
No
where they are. So yeah, anyway, we won't go into that. But I think after that we spoke a lot. And I think by just the function of you being in startups and in that side of the world where I think metrics are very, very important.
Yeah.
I think you instill that kind of a thought process in me. I remember the first time you asked me, what's your EBITDA? And I had no idea what the fuck EBITDA is. I did remember like studying at some point, but no one looks at all that. But I think it changed since, and then immediately COVID happened. So it got even stronger for me to like look into all this. And I think then we spent a lot of time because you were working out of this office space and stuff. And I think that sort of gave insight into how you were thinking, working, also early days of Bonomi, etc. So very glad we're doing this. I think there's a lot of insight. I think you're one of those, I think the 2 people I want on the show from the time I've started. One's my friend Richard Hood. If he's watching, do come on the show. He's probably the most insightful guy I know in the world of football. And then there's you.
Sure.
I think the 2 people who I have most insightful conversations with. So I'm sure this will be of value to whoever's watching. The other thing, which I think is a reason why we sync, I think is because you and I both sort of grew up here.
Yeah.
And you don't find too many people in the startup and the business world, at least in Bangalore these days, especially in Ranagar, who are actually from Bangalore. So I think there's a bit of, at least in my circles, I don't know how it's for you.
Yeah.
But most Bangaloreans I know who are my friends either have legacy businesses that they're running or are not doing business, right? So I think there's a huge factor there. I've never asked you this, but what was growing up in Bangalore like? I know you're a army kid.
Air Force, yeah. No, so I first 10 years was Delhi.
All right.
But every...
First 8 years was Delhi.
First 8 years.
See?
But every summer holiday was Bangalore.
Right.
Because mom's entire family is here.
Right.
And then I think the last 25 odd years has now just been Bangalore. I think we've discussed this at some point of time. At Uber, when Travis was around, I think at that point of time he had said, I think it was you who said this, not entirely, I can't fully remember. He said there are 3 Bs that matter in the world, which is Beijing, Bay Area and Bangalore. So very, very fortunate to be within India, be in Bangalore.
Right.
Absolutely love the energy of Bombay, but growing up in Bangalore, I don't think either of us could maybe live in Bombay. It's just too fast for us.
For me, it's the weather.
For you, it's the weather.
I like the speed. The weather
I like the
is fuck
speed.
all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's the weather.
But I don't think, like, we're so used to space over here that I don't think we'd be able to live in Bombay. But growing up in Bangalore was phenomenal. Also because grandparents were here and, we would see them. Liked Bangalore because it's such a chill city. And then did schooling over here, went to college over here, and then immediately started working over here as well.
Right. And I'm sure Bangalore's changed like crazy, right? Did you think this would turn into the startup capital it is today? I mean, I don't think we were old enough to even factor in those things.
Yeah.
But I couldn't think, like, the fact that it's got so crowded,
Yeah.
right? Or the kind of traffic that's there. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure I and somewhere you, your grandparents, all of them came into the city and sort of found home there.
Yeah.
But I remember I keep telling these guys, I would go from Indranagar to Whitefield in school in 10 minutes. Okay. And there was no signal on the way, literally, because there was no need for it. And obviously things changed. But like, do you see this, like, did you anticipate like the fact that we are in the 3Bs, like one of them at any point?
I honestly did not even understand this whole ecosystem of a startup ecosystem till I joined Uber, to be really honest, right? That's one. But to see what Bangalore's become right now, for me, I don't think the amount of time spent in travel has really mattered too much for multiple reasons. I think for me, schooling was always, I was really far off from home. So I would take a minimum of about an hour and a half each way. And then college for me was far off from home to college. But I took this course, which for some reason started at 6 a.m. Because my hypothesis at that point of time was I would get out of school, do this course and get done by 9 a.m. and then do a job for 3 years and get out of college and say I have 3 years work X, right? But I would still ride all the way from home to college in the morning, which would take about a good 30, 40, 45 minutes, and then the same amount of time back. Immediately after college, I immediately got into sales. Very, very thankful for that, but also loved it. But you're always on the road. And it's almost like life has come full circle now, because I was joking and telling friends I've spent more time in my car in the last 4 years than I have at home. So yes, the city's gotten obviously exponentially that much more bigger. There are those many more cars. It's that much more hotter. But it's still a fantastic city to be in.
Yeah, fucking so there's no question about it. It's the best.
100%.
Right? Very interesting thing you said, which is working while in college. Right? And I think we've discussed this long back.
Yeah.
I was adamant I will not work during college.
Yeah.
I didn't have to, A. And B, I think I played a lot of sports. So that activity sort of kept you occupied, and working means to give that up. And I remember some of them took that choice, but I didn't want to do it. What triggered that for you?
To work?
Yeah.
So I didn't work.
Okay.
I got and think I'm going to work.
Okay.
But I didn't.
Okay.
College life. It was phenomenal, right? I did bits and pieces of work, but they had an end goal. Like, for example,
gigs.
Gigs was one. And then to do, like, so at that point of time, I just picked up DJing a little bit and I wanted to buy this controller. And so dad said, hey, nothing doing. So I think this was end of first year to second year. So we all have those 2 months. And I did a night shift at a call center. So, and it was all the way in Koramangala and I used to stay in Kamanali. So I would always be the first pickup in the afternoon and the last drop. So I would get picked up at about 2:30 p.m. for a 5 p.m. shift. And then I would finish at about 2 a.m. and then get dropped back by about 4:30. So I did that, I think, exactly for 42 days. 42 because like the 43rd, the salary hit. And then I just like bounced because it was just enough to buy the controller and a little bit more. So that happened. But I think it was a very, very humbling experience. We're so used to just finishing our day, sleeping, in the night. But then there's this whole ecosystem out there that's making it,
But that wasn't the first proper job, right? The first job which you had, you told me about this. I think it's a great story. The one in sales.
Yeah.
It's crazy what they did. And I didn't even know a function that existed.
So this was then the one right after college.
Yeah.
TWB, the writer's block. Now, if you think back, a startup in its own right, but small organization, 20, 25 people, you still need revenue to be booked every month. And on revenue booked every month, you need previous month's revenue to kick in into the bank account from a cash flow perspective to meet off expenses, right? But fundamentally, we used to sell a product. I was in sales and we used to sell a product that no one ever uses, right? Like you bought many phones till now?
Yeah.
5, 6, 7?
No, 4, 5.
4, 5. Yeah. And in the earlier versions of the phones, you would get a user manual.
Yeah.
How many times have you read it?
Never.
That's exactly what we used to do. And except we used to do it for different industries. the organization was in the function of rendering technical writing as a service across different industries.
Right.
I remember the first couple of months, I just couldn't, understand how do you even sell this. But then, like, when you got to sell, right? I did that for 2 years. That was also where I met Anindya, my first manager then, who also then, helped me get Bonomi off the ground in 2020.
Right.
And hands down, he's now one of my closest friends. So that was sales, for the first 2 years.
Right. And we discussed this, right? That a sales job, what it does to you. Like, it just shreds all inhibition, pushes you out of the comfort zone. You're just forced to do it.
Yeah.
Like, my first job also was technically in sales, right? So I had to do yellow pages, pick up those and call. You don't realize, but somewhere it takes away all fear, right? Because you get so many rejections.
Yeah.
So you're like immune by the end of it.
Yeah.
And then you also start you get good at it. You know how to then not just get rejected, but fight it. And then like how you sort of swim against the tide and figure your way out. Priceless, right? So like, do you think that helped in
100%.
Like from there on?
100%. So TWB also happened because I got rejected by every single company at college placements, right? And I mean, all of them were like great brands for companies, but essentially all of them were, I think, back offices of really great brands, right? So we had, for example, NENY, we had a GS, and your typical set of companies that come into a commerce college. I applied to all of them because they just sounded like great brands, and also because everyone in my network was applying to them. I remember I got rejected to every one of them. TWB happened, I think I found it, I can't even remember where I found it, but there's a damn good chance I would have found it in the newspaper as an ad saying we're hiring.
Right.
I happened to interview and got it. And I remember I got out when they said, here's the offer letter. And I read the offer letter, and the offer letter had this number at the end of it. So I didn't go through the breakup. I just went through the number. And it was a phenomenal number. It was like 2.5x of what my peers were getting at, let's say, a GS or EAY. And that's it. I didn't think much of it. But then when I started working, and when the first paycheck came and hit my account, it was about 1/5 of what was in the offer letter.
Variable.
Yeah, because there's more variable. Right. And so over there, variable pay was, you were given variable pay every 6 months. Right. So it was an annual, which is a great thing. The first variable pay that I got was higher than my whole year's salary. I also went and bought a really ludicrous cycle out of that, which I haven't used too much, but I still have it. And then after that, it was just an adrenaline rush. And I think you speak to anyone who's in sales and they will tell you this, it's not so much about the number as much as it is about hitting a target.
Yeah. The process.
Yeah. I think that's the rush.
Right.
And hence I'm actually very, very great. So for two things, one, for sales as a process. And at that point of time, it wasn't called growth.
Yeah.
It wasn't called marketing.
Yeah.
It wasn't called any of that. It was called sales. Right?
Correct.
And then it's very binary. It's very 0 100. It's black or white. There are no grays. Right? Your variable pay was a function of your invoice date has to be punched in by 31st March 11:59. Goes to 0.00, it's accounted for the next quarter.
Right.
And that's just how it is. Right? And then your payout is also according to that. So two things, very, very grateful for the fact that sales was the first experience. And then the second one also that I was selling a product that no one would use. The moment you're in sales and you're also selling a product that is fairly evolved in its journey, I'm not saying it's easy, but the groundwork has sort of already been done. So it's not that much harder. So I think these two things, having it as my first experience was, I would do it 100 times over.
So I remember my first job, technically, I remember they wanted to hire me for sales. Then I requested if they could make the designation sales and marketing, because marketing was cooler.
Yeah.
Right. But I remember because I think this is around that time, 2010 to 13, 14, where maybe that evolution also was coming a little bit, where marketing was getting a little more prominence. One thing I remember from one of the internships I did, where I learned nothing but this, It's funny because my dad was the GM there, right? But I went there, and the thing I learned was the guy who was training us said this one line. He said, if you're in sales, you know the pulse of your customer.
Yeah.
Right. And I think priceless. Like that's helped me so much because like right now, if you look at what we are doing, there's so much advertising, marketing in it. But when I break it down, I think a lot of marketing is actually thinking and ideating and all of that stuff. But if you don't have that sales DNA, right, you sort of get stuck when you try to implement it.
Yeah.
Because it's like learning theory without practical. And I think sales is the ultimate practical form.
Yeah.
That's the bottom of the funnel, right?
Yeah.
Trying to get the conversion in. So it's crazy. From there on, I think you went to one of the hottest startups in the world at that time, Uber.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Via a referral. A friend of mine who's now actually, very happy for him, Akshay BD. He's just hosted. Yeah.
Akshay Summit.
Yeah. Akshay Summit with Nas Daily. Yeah. So we had, common connects. And I reached out to him. He had, I think, joined Uber about a year before that.
Right.
And said, look, send me your CV. And I think then connected me with the team. And in about a week, we finished the entire process.
Right.
And before I knew it, I was in.
So I want to ask you this because you had no MBA.
Yeah.
None of that fancy degrees, right?
Yeah.
Back then, I don't think you could get a job in a startup like that if you didn't have that kind of a degree or a validation, I would say. Or were there people getting in? Because from what I remember, 2014, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Is it
2014, 15? Yeah. No, that's not true, actually.
Okay.
There were folks getting in who were possibly non-IIT-IM. But the weightage to folks who came from, let's say, or either had an Eng degree or a master's, or possibly also came in with a certain amount of work X was obviously higher. So you would find greater
Uber
weightage.
Or in the market generally?
I think at Uber and in the market in general. But also at that point of time, I think my then manager, Bhavik, just did a really great job at getting a really diverse set of folks in. Because if it was just everyone of just the same background, same work X, same pedigree, I think it would just be a whole bunch of folks in a room, but incredibly insecure because you know inside out of everyone. So like, for example, on the rest of the team, we had someone who was actually a lawyer who who then got into marketing, someone who was again in sales and then got into operations. And all of these folks now have just gone on to do some really, really incredible things. By the way, it was a really small team. It was about 8 or 9 people.
Yeah.
At that point of time, early years of Uber, which was also a great learning, it was a very hub and spoke model. So while you had a central team based out of NCR, you also then had city teams, which over a period of time then got consolidated into regions. And then obviously as Uber scaled, then the teams also became redundant, which also became part of the process.
Right. I remember Uber's been the reference in a lot of places that I've been in rooms, etc., where they say we want to have a lean team like Uber. Uber is a model, Uber's example. But that's a function of the culture also, right? And Uber culture is one of those that's so very highly spoken of. And I think it's influenced a whole bunch of startups after. But what is it like being in there in those early days? At least in India, it was early days.
Look, I think we were very, very fortunate, while it was a lean team, to be backed by incredible tech and just a really, really large corpus of money. That's the fact of the matter, right? We've done campaigns where we've done Uber pool rides at 4 rupees. How hard is it going to be if I'm going to send you from point A to point B at the cheapest possible cost?
Yeah.
So sure, it's a lean team. It's all of that, right? But the ground reality is we had an enormous amount of money. We had incredible tech, but we also did some of the coolest stuff out there. And I think that's where the DNA and the culture really, really kicked in. I think those years at Uber were possibly, it was like doing an MBA every day. Because you're never the smartest person in the room, but the culture was also such that you would never be insecure about it and you're always learning.
Right.
So that was one just on culture. But I think the second thing was we were also continuously just surrounded by a great set of managers and peers who would just keep pushing.
Right.
There was never no without a reason. Like you could always justify anything that you possibly wanted to do. And that was very, very helpful. Yeah.
Right.
We put together a campaign for around Christmas and New Year's. It was called Uber Cheer. And so the idea was, let's do 5 days. And these were called on-demands. And on-demand was basically, we had the ability to create a separate vehicle view, very similar to how you would have Uber Go or Uber X. And we said, let's do 5 days of 5 different on-demands, where you press a button and instead of getting a ride, you'll get something else, right? And so I remember we did burgers on demand at midnight.
Right.
And this is, I think, even before Swiggy or Zomato was possibly delivering at 12 o'clock.
2015.
Yeah. So we did burgers from about 12 a.m. to about 3 a.m. Except the burgers were at that point of time cooked by a really, really small joint that possibly someone wouldn't have heard of. And I think, honestly, if any brand could have pulled that off at that point of time, it was Uber.
Because it was lean and fast and all of that?
Yeah. So if Uber is saying, hey, this is a burger you should be having, then this is a burger you should be having. Right? So we did that. We did some incredible set of partnerships with some incredible brands. I think we had done the launch of the VR headset with OnePlus on Uber, where you create a separate vehicle view, you request it, and then you would get a VR headset. So it was really fun. Got to learn a lot, and possibly one of the best teams I have worked with, and maybe will work with as well in the future.
Right. And from there, you went to Dunzo.
Yeah.
Again, a startup in the early days, which is back then, I think, very, very cool for what it did.
Yeah.
This is 2018, I think. This is around time when I think we started to spend time together and stuff.
Right.
So I remember I think you called me.
Yeah.
After we had met. Well, so you were defending Uber and turning profitable and all that. And then I think 2 weeks later we connected and you said, I'm at Dunzo now. Right? So you fought till the end basically. And then I remember you called us to the office and we had some work-related conversation. And you were there for about a year or more.
I was there exactly for a year.
Right. Got it. So what was Dunzo like? Because I think Dunzo was solving something very innovative, like in terms of, I think we couldn't have thought about that being a service maybe even 5 years before that, right?
Yeah.
But that shift and I still use Dunzo, by the way, for like certain errands and stuff. It's just easy, right? It's just behavior. But what is that like? I remember you said something very interesting to me long back.
Which was?
The inverted pyramid. But I don't know, we should talk about that. So, but yeah.
So getting into Dunzo was actually not where there was a role available and I applied. Dunzo happened for me because at that point of time, I used to order a lot from Nagarjuna.
Right. They weren't on Swiggy.
Yeah,
I remember
right?
this.
Pre-COVID, a lot of brands weren't on Swiggy. Yeah. And so you would use Dunzo. And I remember at that point of time just looking at the app and thinking that there's the ability to monetize over here on a whole bunch of fronts. So I made a 2-pager. And there was an ex-Uber colleague who was working at Dunzo, and I routed this 2-pager via him to Kabir. That actually just got me the interview.
Yeah.
And I remember actually at Dunzo, we went through all of the interviews. At that point of time, when I was interviewing with Dunzo, they were actually working out of an old house in Indranagar, not too far from here. They got back with a number, and I wasn't happy with the number, so I declined it. And then they came back with a revised number. And so the revised number had a fixed component and a variable component. And so for the sake of discussion, let's say fixed plus variable is, let's say 50, just random, right? Sake of conversation. I had actually gone back and said, let's do fixed plus variable at 70, but reduce the fixed to even lesser than what it was at the fixed plus variable of 50. And everyone was like, hey, no, this doesn't work. But from what I had heard, Kabir vetoed it because Kabir also had spent time in sales. And he said, if someone's actually coming back and saying, I want a higher variable, then this is exactly, the sort of people you want in the ecosystem.
Shows confidence, I guess. And capability. Because if you're bullshitting, you'll be caught out and then you don't have to pay that person. It's actually a win-win for the business.
It is. But it had done really well for me at TWB and then a little bit at Uber as well. But I was also at that point of time really clear about what I wanted to be able to do at Dunzo, which is why I was fairly confident. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So Dunzo happened, did a year, but did 4 different projects of 3 months each. I think one of our highest products sold on the platform back then was cigarettes. I think even now, and I think that's the case for most of the quick commerce platforms out there. The holy grail right now is F&B, which is fruits and vegetables, and along with that, milk, which is a daily essential product, and tobacco. But you make absolutely no money on those products, right? But it sort of becomes the wedge which allows you to get onto the platform, add products to cart, and then it's up to the platform to be able to upsell you and add more.
Right.
So I actually remember meeting ITC at their office in Calcutta and onboarding them. And while the absolute commission that we would earn on every packet of tobacco that would be sold on the platform was lesser, the volume was so high that it actually became fairly profitable for us in terms of what the platform was earning. The other one similar to tobacco at that point of time was actually pet food. Really, really good margins.
Right.
I just feel like right now it was ahead of its time. Like if you look at what's happening in just the pet ecosystem right now, it's phenomenal.
I remember you telling me, I think it was the Future Group who wanted to launch their quick commerce. I remember you gave me an example long back. I think it was you. You said he wants to, or the business wants to basically sell samosas as quick commerce, right? In under, I think you gave me a number, which is 5 or something like that. A ludicrous number.
Yeah.
And within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, no way. Like the unit economics is never going to make sense. And you look at the war right now on quick commerce.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like I think in Indranagar, you'll still get in between 9 and 12 minutes average, right?
Yeah.
With the traffic and everything somehow. Maybe somewhere little interior Bangalore in parts, maybe a little longer, maybe 15, 20. But that is crazy, the war that's out there.
Yeah.
And to think Dunzo was ahead of its time there, was it too ahead of its time? Like people didn't maybe require it back then, but then maybe it created the habit and now the second, say, movers in the market are sort of benefiting from it?
No, I don't think it was ahead of its time, to be honest. I think user adoption was really, really solid. Retention was great. And then I also got out of the whole ecosystem, like the grocery ecosystem, like even before the whole quick commerce boom. But I think at that point of time, we had just started to see very, very solid uptake on different categories. Grocery was starting to do really well. Pick and drop is actually a very profitable category. And at that point of time, I think we were just also launching the B2B version, which is D4B, Dunzo for Business. And actually, when we launched that, we went back old school. Like the initial bit was actually, we took, I think, about 5 folks from one of the customer support teams and set up inside sales.
Right.
And so we set up the team. And then I realized that no one was actually doing any work for the first 2 days because they didn't know who to call. And I realized it was so different. It was just maybe 5 years apart from when I was doing sales, because at that point of time, there was no social.
Yeah,
it was just digital yellow pages. So you would like go through and try and find numbers to call. But I remember when we set up this inside sales team, the way we finally gave them access to a database was, I think I'd ended up buying some databases of just local businesses in Bangalore.
Right.
And then one after the other, that's how we just started to call non-board.
I've wondered, do yellow pages still exist? Like digital version must, right? I haven't seen one in a long time.
Isn't that Just Dial now?
Yeah, I guess. I think true, because Just Dial was also there back then. I remember if you needed anything, you went to Just Dial in 2011, 12 also.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was as sophisticated as an app. But nowadays, I think now this is what's happened, right? Everybody has digital presence. It's hard to find something in the city that doesn't have.
Yeah.
So you directly go and you get a number, or you, worst case, they're also on a platform, be it air menus and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes even easier. But crazy. So I don't know how much you're allowed to talk about it, but looking back then to now, where did things go wrong for Dunzo? So
I think my information obviously is limited, but I think there was a significant amount of capital that was raised, 2022, right? But it was also at that point of time, a whole bunch. So then 4 players, I think round about the time Zomato had just IPO'd, and then sort of also then led the acquisition of Blinkit. Instamart had, or rather Swiggy independently just for the Instamart business had raised, if I'm not mistaken, about $700-800 million. You had Zepto, and hats off to them just for like pure execution. Had also raised a reasonable amount of capital, and then you had Dunzo on about 240 million, right? I don't necessarily think just from what's gone wrong, but it was also just capital was, right? You had one platform that was incredibly strong and had raised 3x more capital.
Right.
From what I understand, early days of quick commerce, everyone was bleeding equal amounts of money. And then at that point of time, funding winter also started to set in towards end of 22. So raising capital became significantly more harder. And then if you're third or fourth out of a 4-player race, it's even more harder. That's what I assume could have possibly gone wrong for Dunzo. Yeah.
And Zepto, like you said, is a crazy story, right? To think that they're teenagers essentially.
Yeah.
Because I've like over work here and otherwise I do meet a lot of young people. But to think that, and this is proper Gen Z, right? The group or the demographic group that we sort of say are not most say adaptable to the business world and capitalism and all that, and then you have these examples. I've seen a lot of the interviews and read stuff about them, but fucking crazy, dude. Like as teenagers to do that.
No doubt. Like absolutely phenomenal execution. I think it's come down to that. I also do think though that when you at the time when you're starting, you've got zero bias of any prior legacy, right? So you're coming in with absolutely zero expectation. And then the second thing is you're starting on an absolute clean slate, right? So you're saying, I'm starting day zero. Here's my certificate of incorporation, right? And all I want to do is deliver groceries in 10 minutes, right? I'm not a food delivery app that has now also launched groceries in 10 minutes. I'm just launching clean slate on day zero, just groceries in 10 minutes.
Right.
And the sort of just that amount of focus when you're just doing one thing, like a horse with blinkers, tremendously helps.
Yeah.
Because I would assume you've got typically for all of the other companies, you've got common resources, you've got common teams. You don't necessarily have separate teams for each independent vertical of each of these companies, right? And then you've got this one company who's just come in out of nowhere. But I'm just going to do one thing and I'm going to go super, super deep. But the ability to also do that full stack, because they essentially build their own dark stores, build relationships, and go full stack. Because I remember, I think when we were testing it out very early on at Dunzo, we were still delivering from existing stores.
Yeah.
But to be able to go in with razor sharp focus, go full stack, build dark stores, and actually get products out in 10 minutes.
And this is, I think, also during COVID.
Yeah.
I'm not remember.
Yeah.
Around for, wrong. I think
21.
Yeah. 20, just
end of 2020.
Yeah. Looking back, do you think that would, because I would like look at the Uber model where you don't own dark stores, you don't have, real estate, and then you sort of play the absolute middleman, which is the truest logistics format, right? You basically just fulfill. And that seems so easy in terms of being light on capex, etc. And then there's this model where you actually have dark stores, you have to maintain it, you have staff, you have all of that. Sure, you control the supply chain.
Yeah.
But that shift, I couldn't think that would be the way to go forward, to be very honest.
I think though, so two things. One, purely from a consumer experience point of view, the only way, if you really want to be able to control the entire consumer experience and actually deliver in 10 minutes, you need to have absolute control of inventory and assortment. That's actually the most important. I remember, I think the moment you started to add products to cart on Zepto, they would actually start packaging it already, even before you place an order. I think. I'm not entirely sure, right? But so if you really want to control consumer experience, then you need to go full stack. But you also need to have really strong control on assortment. But that was back then, right? If you look at it now, average order values have tremendously increased. Like, we wouldn't be surprised if next year, summer, you're ordering ACs from these quick commerce platforms, right? It's going to happen. Like, if we look at data today, we're one of the few countries where the quick commerce playbook is actually playing out. QC has not done well anywhere else in any of the other economies. Right. Also because human capital is not as cheap as it is in India. With that, what's happening is, I remember seeing an ad, I think on one of the digital platforms by Blinkit saying, become a store owner.
Yeah.
So now essentially you're saying, I've understood full stack, but now I'll be asset light.
Right.
And I'll do a FOCO model, right? Which is you put in the money, it's your store, I'll run it.
Right.
Right. And then we do a rev share. Typically, I would imagine this would work out really well for a lot of people who are typically landlords.
Right.
Right. Because you would control the building or you would own the building. And then your prime real estate you will give out for frontage. And any dead space is great for dark stores or cloud kitchens. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you this because in any market where the aggregator controls your demand, right? In this, and even with Uber for that matter, when competition does go up, there's a significant risk, right? In terms, if the profit sharing is a model,
right,
that you're not making enough back because the fact that this is a bloodbath out there. So typically, what's the duration in which these guys would do these deals? Even in Uber, I'm very curious. Like, how long is when they signed up at Uber back in those days? Is it like, okay, I'm locked in with Uber, I can't do Ola or any of the others, or is it more of like there's a period, or it's flexible, or were there different kinds of contracts? I'm very curious. Never asked you this.
There were different kinds of contracts, but
you just had to be flexible, I guess, when you're dealing with that kind of
and
workforce.
At the end of the day, we're one of the most jogadu countries in the world, right? So if there's a partner who want to drive on 2 platforms or even more, they would find a way to do it.
Right. Yeah.
That's just how it is, right? Coming to the existing quick commerce platforms, I think fundamentally it just comes down to this. End of the day, distribution is greater than product. All of the 3 companies that I worked in earlier were fundamentally distribution companies, and where you would acquire consumers over a prolonged period of time and then try and monetize, let's say over the next 5 years. The last 4 years has been a product business, right?
Yeah.
We're listed on platforms where they control the distribution. You're not a pull brand yet. I'll give you an example. We had in our category, which is just the cold coffee product, we had a really large player launch the exact same product and same bottle, a cold coffee.
Right.
We call it cold coffee. They call the product cold brew. So they call the milk coffee cold brew. Their sampling budget just for Bangalore urban was, for first 6 months, was 12x the total capital I've raised in 4 years.
How do you compete with that?
There's absolutely no answer, right?
You pick and choose, I guess.
You pick and choose. Yeah. You pick and choose, right? So that's the reason why, today, if you look at all of the platforms, and it's how platforms also have to work. They're fundamentally also answerable to someone. They need to be able to generate monies, either for public if it's a listed company, or PE or VC. But for every packet of Nandini milk that's sold on any of these platforms, they need players like us, where you end up essentially balancing the spread on the portfolio of your basket to be able to maintain a 20, 25, 30%. Yeah. And that's where brands like us sort of also come in, right? If you've controlled the distribution, then as a platform, you can pretty much sell whatever you want.
Right. We'll come back to the distribution bit because after Dunzo, obviously I remember this was a time when I was trying to get you to come do some work with us. And then I remember we met one evening and he said, I'm quitting.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, now what next? I thought, did you take my offer seriously or something? And then you said, I'm going to Kunal Shah's new startup.
Yeah, CRED.
Yeah. And you said CRED. I was like, what's that?
Right.
I think this is 2018. End of
2018.
November, December.
2018. No. 2019 beginning. Around Feb, March. Around Feb.
Yeah. But I think you were in conversation maybe a month before, so something like that.
Yeah.
So I remember somewhere around that period, I was like, what's CRED? And that was my first question. And then you sort of explained very nicely about the influence from the way the Chinese grade the citizen and stuff like that. But then that happened. What is that like? Early days of CRED, right?
Yeah.
There were less than 100 employees at that time?
Yeah.
And you were, I remember, growth at CRED.
Yeah.
That was it was like a working title.
Yeah. But very, very short stint.
A year.
No, lesser than a year.
Right. Because I think that entrepreneurial bug was in you even before you moved to CRED. I remember because we were talking and I think there's always that itch as an entrepreneur that was there.
Yeah.
I think this is my assessment, which is the excitement of the startup world kept you hooked because it gives you freedom, independence, you get to do a lot of things and that makes you feel like a intrapreneur, right? It is what it is. You're an entrepreneur within a system.
Yeah.
And then I think you went to CRED as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's more or less the same, right? A lot of independence and freedom. The way the startups work is that.
Yeah.
But it was a short stint, yes.
Yeah.
Just before the ads went live.
And I think right before I joined CRED, I had my first ever cold brew at the third wave not too far from here.
Right.
and I didn't know what cold brew was, but I remember having it and immediately falling in love. And then right before I joined, I'd taken a quick vacation and I'd been to, I think, the Starbucks at Prague. And I actually, and it was a really long line. And the barista over there said, so I said, can I get, a black coffee? And she actually said, do you want it hot or cold? And I said, I'll do cold. And she said, okay, do you want an iced Americano or do you want a cold brew? I didn't actually know what the difference between the two was.
Right.
But she was kind enough to explain it to me. So that's where the seed of just coffee happened. And I think by December of 2019, I had sort of said, look, if I'm going to do this, I need to do this now. And I think I was turning 30 in Jan. And I said, my 20s were great, but I don't necessarily want to spend my 30s how I'd spent my 20s. Right. So I got out before I finished the year. I didn't, and which is also fairly intentional, I didn't vest my first year cliff. I think I got out in 10 months. So I got out in Jan. I also at that point of time knew that I didn't know too much of coffee. I also really enjoy just the whole business of alcohol. And sort of got a lot of exposure of that via CRED and just brands. And so actually booked a brewing course
in Germany.
In Germany, in Berlin.
Yeah, I remember.
In Berlin. Yeah, a brewing course and a distilling course. Yeah. And then COVID, but in a way, It's been a blessing in disguise. But yeah, CRED, super, super short stint. Fantastic stint in the sense that just tremendous learning. Again, some of the smartest people worked with. And like you probably heard it, you've, on many different podcasts, but Kunal the way he thinks is very, very different.
Right.
So tremendous learning on that, from him as well.
Right. What are the takeaways there? Like, so Uber, Dunzo, CRED, right? Crazy journey. So if you were to summarize it and say, let's break it down. Let's say, what is the biggest takeaway combined and individually?
I think combined was, and that's my opinion now, but I think if anyone's ever building a business, and it can be any business, it's okay. You need to think profitability from day one, or even before you start. And that's just my opinion now. Like that's a combined opinion across all the three companies. Individually on each of them, the thing is though that that particular decade, 2010s, was also sort of changing every 2 years.
Right.
Like market dynamics itself were changing every 2 years. So you had 5 different phases just that decade. And each of these companies was almost in a very, very different phase.
Right.
But it was almost like doing about 5 to 6 years long of doing an MBA and doing a PhD because you got to learn that much more.
Right.
Each of them different in their own right and very, very different industries. I would do the same assortment or selection, all over again.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you were to break them down individually and like one thing that you learned from each of those places? Or like biggest takeaway, I wouldn't say learned. Let's just say one lasting impression that each of them had.
From each of them?
Yeah.
I think Uber taught me scale. And you could actually see it. Dunzo taught me a fuck ton of empathy.
Why though? I'm curious. I didn't expect empathy at all as an answer.
I think it was just the way the culture was. Also the way Kabir was. And the third was also just how we would sort of be with all of the driver partners. That's why I would say empathy.
Right.
I think CRED was just access to and sort of just understanding and rather appreciating bias for action and first principles. Yeah, that was CRED, even though it was a very, very short stint. But so I think these would be 3 takeaways for each of these companies.
Right. I didn't expect empathy. Very interesting. Not the word you hear in the startup world, right? Like,
yeah.
So, I remember you moved out of CRED and we were having this discussion.
Yeah.
And like I'm terming this as the Aukat factor, right? So we spoke about this, and not just in startups. I think any large business, any large platform that you leave, even if you probably leave a family business that's like legacy and decades old, that person would face this. But there's a tremendous amount of attention that you get when you're in positions of power, right? To leave that and then to go to absolutely ground zero and starting from there, it sort of changes a few things. And like, I've never worked in a place like that, so I don't know what it's like to feel power that way, at least. But you did, and I remember you telling me this. But that's like, I think, a very, very good example for a lot of founders who probably worked and then started, right? But yeah, you want to share a bit of that? Like, a simple thing I can maybe put the foundation to this is, I remember when you were in CRED, you would say you would call and people would pick up the phone on the first go, right?
Yeah.
When you started out your own and when they know you're not in the ecosystem anymore, there are days on ends when you send a message and you don't even get a response back.
Yeah, but I think fundamentally it just comes down to the fact that all of those relationships, and rightfully so, they're all transactional, right? Hypothetically, today we're in the news for raising a lot of capital as a company.
Right.
I could call back all of those people today and they would answer immediately on the first ring, right? I also think that it's better when it's like transactional.
Because you're not obligated?
Yeah. Simple. It's definitely better. It makes it easier for both sides. Today, I think where we're at is also everything that we see, everything that we hear, or like, for example, what's on the home screen of, I don't know, what apps do you have on your phone right now? You know how all of us have these folders, right? So there's food, there's maybe work, there's news, right?
No.
Okay. So give me an example of a few apps that you open just to read.
Twitter. X. Okay. X is my news platform.
Okay.
Yeah, but WhatsApp. Like, at least people you care about, you hear about things from there, right?
Right.
But yeah, otherwise it's just social media. I mean, I think I survive on that. I just did an episode with a friend of mine who's a journalist, and we were discussing, and I couldn't relate to any of those general behaviors that he was talking about, because my consumption of news is very different. I just filter through because my logic is, if it's really important, it'll reach me some way or the other.
Yeah.
Right? I think so. We don't need to subscribe to a app per se.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fine. So I don't know. I mean, I would have food delivery. I know where you're going with this. Yeah. But
I'll tell you.
I have music.
I'll tell you why I ask.
Payments.
The whole question of, when you're in these companies, obviously everyone wants a piece of the pie, and then the moment you get out, you're still trying to figure out if people still, if you don't necessarily have the same to offer as what you did, right?
Yeah.
I think my opinion on this now is, does it really matter? Because it's come down to, if I need something for which it's a service or a product, that's a transaction value. Typically, I should be able to buy it. If I'm not able to buy it, and hence I'm trying to reach out to someone who has access, fundamentally, there's something flawed over there.
Right.
So, I mean, that's point one. But I think the second one is, the reason I asked you of all of those apps, like, for example, I think there's one particular app that sort of just features everything in the hospitality business, right? All of the recent articles were around businesses that, at best, are possibly doing about 20-30 crore top line annually, right? Now, because of just the nature of our business and the fact that a lot of our distribution and sales comes from the Horeca segment, I've met people who run a few large groups. Like, we know someone in common who typically does about
10x.
Yeah, about 550 crore top line. Not a single rupee picked up on equity, purely debt.
Yeah.
Where they're also picking up debt where the cost of capital is cheaper than what we earn on savings.
Yeah.
Right? A better of about, very, very solid numbers. That's one. We've just opened coffee kiosks, right? We're getting into frontage. We recently came across someone who runs 8,000 unbranded tea kiosks all over Andhra Pradesh. Possibly never heard of the guy.
Yeah.
And nets about 25,000 rupees a beta per kiosk. And you've also never heard of him because he wants to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Because we're a country where you're able to throw people at a problem. So ideally, you want to be able to safeguard all of this.
Yeah.
Right. So I think now it's not so much about, essentially if you have access to people or not. as much as it is you want to just get your head down and build. Because fundamentally, like back in the day, our understanding of fundamentally strong businesses actually still exists today.
Right.
And people actually go an arm and a leg to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And they don't want others to know.
Right.
And so just understanding that those sort of businesses exist that came 6 years after businesses that we would spend money for people to know was a very humbling experience. And I think that's a side that I'm sort of gravitating towards.
Right. Interesting. There's a similar story you told me about the mustard powder, turmeric, Shakti Masala. Shakti was it? Or which is a brand from Tamil Nadu, Erode.
I'm not able to. You want to
There's a
refresh
brand
me?
from Tamil Nadu, right? Which you told me about, which controls the global turmeric market, which I think has 60-65% market share. There's a similar story you told me about some business. I don't know, even I can't recollect the name, but I think it's Shakti. I'm not too sure. But it's basically the turmeric company from Erode, I think near Salem.
Okay.
Which basically, I think it's you who told me, but I think that brand or that business has influence on 65% of all turmeric that's traded in the world.
If you control the distribution, you control the product.
Sitting out of Salem Erode, right? Or
I mean, it's new to me, so might have possibly.
Maybe then it's not you, somebody else who told me. But anyway,
Okay.
But that's one story I remember similarly. But the point of me asking that was because a lot of entrepreneurs can't adjust to that. Right? The fact that somebody didn't answer their call because you're no longer with this big company.
Really?
Yeah, I know people. You know someone. Yeah, we've discussed this anyway.
Okay.
I can't name drop right now, but that we'll talk about it later. But there are people who I know, for example, because it's a status feeling, right?
Sure.
Like they crave it, and as an entrepreneur, you just can't have that because every day you're gonna get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So it's all about being able to have that sense of humility and then reacting to it.
Sure.
But I know tons of people who are in position of power who come out and just can't do it. And I think maybe last decade, a lot more than now, because I feel entrepreneurship was new. So a lot of people then, dived into it thinking that it's going to be easy, or they didn't sort of hear these stories. But now I think the market is matured. It's not, everyone doesn't want to be an entrepreneur anymore, thank God. But there was a period in which everyone did.
Yeah.
And now if you look at it, people, I think, levitating towards being solopreneurs and doing remote jobs. And I think the trend's a bit different now.
Yeah.
But I remember a lot of people in that window from 2012 to maybe COVID, right? COVID really, I think, kept the real entrepreneurs in the game, took the others out. But a lot of people got into it for the glamour, and then when they realized it doesn't have the same level of status, quickly fizzled out. Maybe I think it's also a function of the age groups that I hung out with, because I was also a lot younger. But I think because you had that sales background and initial days weren't so glamorous and status driven, maybe you don't have that feeling when you were out of that ship.
I think though it's been about we've completed 4 years. We're operating in year 5 for us. We've sort of gone through a 2-year itch. So this is like now, this year we've started opening kiosks, frontage businesses. But I think for us, I don't think that side has actually mattered too much for us. I think for us, it's always just been on product and getting the product out in just the right hands. Fortunately though, what also happened for us was Vardhman, in his own right is a Twitter celebrity. So he's managed to do a lot of just that whole piece in terms of organic content. I think at one point of time, early years when cold brew had just come out, it was this new cool beverage everyone wanted to drink. There were memes on us.
Yeah.
I think there was a meme, Bonomi official is the new pran patata of Bangalore. It's easier to get a date on Tinder than it is to get your hands on a bottle of Bonomi. A lot of it was just us being us and being fairly non-conformist. And when we launched the first product, which is cold brew, I think the reason it also caught on really fast is because we were just very, very strong consumers of the product. Right. So coming back to your point was actually Vardhman was doing a lot of that anyway. And so we didn't really feel the need of it too much.
Got it. Again, on that, I have a question to ask, because I mean, to folks who haven't tried it, fucking A, dude, this is the best. I mean, I wasn't much of a coffee drinker. I'm also lactose intolerant. So for me, it works out the fact that it's black.
Yeah.
But I remember 2020, I think it was sometime
21.
21? Yeah, 21,
21.
sorry. Where I think you gave me one of the products you were testing.
Yeah.
What Bonomi was in the first year to second year, huge pivot, right?
Yeah.
So I remember you gave this to me and I tried, and it was a little different back then. I think it was roasted almond, right? The first flavor.
It was a roasted almond.
Fucking A, dude. And I remember I tried it for maybe 4 days in a row. I was a guinea pig at that time for the flavors and stuff. And I remember after that, I would come up and ask, because you guys are just one floor above.
Yeah.
And I got hooked to it. And I remember because I just got into this whole coffee trip after COVID and I just needed it. But the product is refined since then in many ways. And I think this is the best like out there, right? And you haven't paid me for it for sure. Like I've had it all the time. Whenever there's a guest coming, I leave it on the table just to see if they're curious in there. But there's a big entry barrier to it, and I'll ask you that.
Yeah.
Why coffee in a tea drinking country? Within coffee, why cold brew and not milk? Within that, why cold and not hot?
Yeah.
So basically,
all great questions.
Yeah, you have picked the worst odds in every single sub-segment.
Yeah.
Driving down to the last point, right?
Yeah.
Why such a decision to start off with? I never asked you because I found the product to be great.
Yeah.
And then I didn't need to ask.
Yeah.
But a lot of other people probably did. And hence, I know for a fact, when I try to get people hooked onto it, there is a bit of, it's an acquired taste.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So why
why coffee?
Why cold
brew,
not milk?
And
why cold? Why not hot?
The honest answer at that point of time, when we took the decision to move away from being almost like a gifting company, essentially, which is what the first version of Bonomi was, because we would assemble these really cool products and send out cocktail boxes. There was a product or a brand that already existed in every other category. Right. That was one. The second one was that, and that's the absolute honest answer, coffee, a black coffee and that too cold, was because I put myself as the consumer.
Right.
That's the honest answer. We didn't go through the whole exercise of what's the TAM, how expensive is distribution going to be, how are you going to even build education on a physical look, touch, feel product. It's the only thing you should be spending on initially, especially if it's a new category, is wet sampling, which is across modern trade, general trade, Horeca, any of these channels.
Right.
We didn't, at that point of time, and this is right before VJ had joined, I didn't think through any of that. I sort of anticipated, because we were looking at what was happening in coffee across North America and across Europe. And it was the fastest growing format of coffee. Mm-hmm. And I think now if you look at just where cold brew is today to where it was even 3 years back, I think we've seen about a 6x growth on just cold brew as a category. But that's honestly how cold brew happened. There's no bullshit, no faff on. We looked at X amount of data and then the data told us this and then I did 2020, right? 21. We had Sharath back then. Sharath and I did a coffee course with Suhas and the team at Benki in JP Nagar. We brewed the first batch, I think from where we're doing the interview right above. And then when we had decided that we're going to do coffee is when I asked Vardhman to meet me. Vardhman at that point of time was actually working
at a brand that was a client of ours.
Correct. Kite.
Yeah, for a short period.
Yeah, but that was also run by Bhavik, who was both VJ's and my
boss
at Uber. And Bhavik had also, again, seeded Bonomi. And so I met Vardhman at I think, one of the coffee shops. And I said, look, I'm going to have a cappuccino, but I heard they have a really, really good cold brew. You should try it. And so I went to the side. I bought a cappuccino. And then I asked for an extra glass. And from below, I took the cold brew that we had brewed that morning and poured it and gave it to VJ. And he had a sip and he's like, man, this is great. I would not have expected it from these guys, where this is not from here. We brewed this in the morning. We're getting into cold brew and we're going to manufacture it. And I think you should join in. That's how cold brew happened. And to your follow-up question of how Vardhman would have happened, that's the answer already.
Yeah. Because I remember, like, obviously I've seen Bonomi grow over the last, I think the initial 2 years.
Yeah.
So I remember he would hang about.
Yeah.
Initially, we connected saying, oh, he's working in a brand where we're servicing.
Yeah.
And then from there, quickly turned into, I'm here right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But
I think sorry, and just on that, I think the category is a very, very long category. So apart from the fact that at that point of time, we have thought of ourselves as consumers, we also know that the barrier to entry is really high because it's a high friction category, a high friction product to make. It takes an average of about 24 to 36 hours to make a batch, which is unlike your other RTD beverages. For example, a typical carbonated beverage in the market today, you should be able from start to finish, case of 24, to have it in about 3 hours.
Right.
So that was one. The second one was, when we started, we said, look, if we're going to do this and we're going to build this over the next 10 years, we decided against contract manufacturing, which is typically the route that you would take when you're starting.
Yeah.
And then eventually, when you hit certain amount of critical mass, you then say, cool, I'm going to set up manufacturing in-house. But we said we're going to do it from day zero. On a product that takes 36 hours to make a batch.
Reason? Just want to control the output?
Yeah. And we knew it will pay off after a few years.
It's the more purist approach, right?
Correct. By doing so, today, for example, in the last about 12 months, we've had orders on our Shopify of other contract manufacturers who are ordering the cold brew. Right? Because no one's really done this earlier.
Right.
So to be able to crack the how, the which, the balance is not easy. So that's really what's happening right now. And two, just my last piece on just the cold brew itself. There is, especially in metro cities, we now know from individual cafes across, for example, high streets, about 12 to 14% of all of the beverages sold at the cafe on dine-in is cold brew.
What about this cultural shift? Because I remember working with Third Wave in 2018 and them trying to tell us what a cold brew is.
Yeah.
And my initial thing was it's a acquired taste, and it's difficult when you have all the options that you lay out.
Yeah.
Right. And someone once explained it to me about difference between lager and stout. It's a bit like that, right? In beer. Generally, people tend to go towards lager or what's the other option? Anyway, forgot. But stout's hard, right? It's sort of like that. I think for me, certain things work as an individual consumer if I'm to analyze myself.
Right.
But what's bringing about the shift?
I think with cold brew specifically, cold brew is significantly less acidic than typically, let's say, even an iced Americano. Right? Because your iced Americano is, you've taken the espresso, which is your coffee base for a cappuccino, cortado, macchiato. An Americano, you add ice, you've got an iced Americano, right? Cold brew is, I will remove the elements of heat and pressure that go into the making of a typical espresso and replace it with time.
Right.
So I'm going to take freshly ground coffee powder with cold water and just let it sit for 24 hours, go about my day and come back the next day. So that cuts the absolute acidity in your coffee. And typically for people who've grown up or who have a lot of black coffee, having that much lesser acidity is just great for the gut.
Right.
That's one. Second, it's very similar to a cold pressed juice or one with a typical mixie. One which is just not subjected to heat and pressure. Your coffee is typically a little bit more fruity.
Right.
And so I think that's the reason why we're seeing a very, very strong adoption on
But does a consumer know this?
No.
But it's just a subconscious where you feel it. It just feels better. So maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, it does require, even now, and like we've been doing, I mean, the cold brew now for us is about, a little bit more than 2 years old.
Right.
If I meet 50 new people in a day, even today, there'd only be about maybe 4 to 5 people who know what a cold brew is.
Right.
So it's still a relatively small TAM. But given just the size of India, even that small TAM is considerable.
Right.
Just on cold brew though.
Yeah. And from an entry-level perspective, like maybe I should, this is a very interesting, most cold brew drinkers love classic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's without any kind of sugar or flavor.
Yeah.
It's the truest form.
Right.
Unfortunately, because I was guinea pig to a lot of the testing here.
Yeah.
I don't know if guinea pig is the right word, but I like it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? I got hooked to the flavor.
Right.
So I can't get off it now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Right?
Yeah.
So would you classify me as a typical purist cold brew lover? No, right? Because I'm...
But it doesn't... So I think purist would be the wrong word.
Right.
if you like it with flavor and a little bit of sugar, then so be it.
Great. So
Yeah.
this is the other question, because any new cultural trend has the right way of doing it, right? And then the market creates its own trend,
Right.
Simplest. I keep bringing this up at work.
Right.
Hashtags, for example. I think
Yeah.
I told you also this. So if you had 3 letters that you had to put out as a hashtag back in
Right.
the day when Twitter was new,
Right.
2008, 9, whatever, you basically had 3 letters separated by an underscore. You can still try it. It still trends as one hashtag, by the way.
3 letters?
Yeah, like for example, say Royal. No, actually, no, it's not. That's not going to trend. I don't want to talk about it either. Fucking hell. Worst season ever. Anyway, let's say, okay, I love cold brew. Okay,
Sure.
4 words. You would do hashtag I _ love _ cold _ brew.
Okay.
Right? And that's how hashtags were.
Okay.
On Twitter at least. And
Right.
then Instagram copied it, and basically you could hashtag 30 words, right, with a unique hashtag, and all of them went. It's a culture from blogging. That's how tags as a concept came about. But that's the sort of the way that we all do it now, right? Because we got used to it.
Sure.
So there's a way that it was intended to be, the way Twitter started it. And then there's a way that the market adopted it because of just behavior. And that's how everything is. So do you see among at least your customer base and the market generally, there coming a culture where you're having flavored or maybe slightly sweeter versions of cold brew than what it initially started off as? Which is,
look, on the cold brew category specifically, of 100 cold brews that we sell, we'll sell 5 classics. 95% is still flavored and mildly sweetened.
right.
The classic is, I mean, it's just pure coffee, no sugar, and just
Right.
plain.
Is it because of India? Is it an Indian phenomenon? Because we, at least in South, we're used to South Indian filter coffee.
Yeah.
Up north, I think it's mainly tea, but typically we like sugar.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
that the reason?
I definitely think it is a slightly more India phenomenon in terms of the whole, I need my beverage to be slightly more sweeter. No doubt about that. But also, like, if you look at the US, they're predominantly a coffee drinking country. And we've seen it in the movies, we've seen it with friends. You wake up in the household and you've got a pot of coffee. And that coffee is predominantly black without sugar. It's just like in the DNA of how they've grown up drinking. So the whole thing of sweetened and flavored, yes, it is unique to India, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
When we launched, we were absolute purists. And we launched only classic. There were only 4 people buying the product. There was Vardhman, his wife, my wife, and me. So then we launched the vanilla, hazelnut,
Right.
roasted almond, caramel.
Yeah.
Vardhman also went mad flavor scientist. At some point of time, we also launched a Kokum cold brew.
Yeah. I tried that.
We launched fruit cold brews. We launched an orange. We launched a lychee. We launched a strawberry, and we launched a passion fruit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think those 5 don't exist now, but yeah.
So I think the initial 3 you figured are the ones, right?
Yeah. 80-20 rule. 80% of all volume comes from 20% of SKUs. Yeah.
I'm searching for the image that I took on the day Bonomi launched. I think I backed it up into my drive. I don't have, but it's from the terrace. I have all 3 flavors stacked up on a terrace.
Yeah.
I took a picture of it.
I think we all, at that point of time when we launched, we also launched in Benadryl bottles.
Yeah.
200 ml Benadryl bottles.
And there was another bottle in between.
Yeah.
Which was actually a very cool
That
bottle.
was a phenomenal bottle.
But why do you change to this? Is this easier retail wise?
Because so that's the thing, right? When we launched solving for form over function. That bottle was a 200 ml amber bottle. My inspiration for the bottle was a beer from Goa called King's.
Right.
Absolutely cult beer. King's beer, Old Monk rum sort of fall in the same segment. And I knew that for us to be able to stand out on a shelf, which we would get to at some point of time, the bottle would be a very big differentiator for us.
Right.
So we got the mold of that bottle made, solving for form over function. And that bottle is really slim at the top and then just all of a sudden becomes really fat and stubby. But what started happening after about 6 to 9 months of getting that bottle into the market, one of our largest distribution partners was the Horeca segment. And in the Horeca segment, on peak bar ops on a Friday, Saturday night, you would just open bottles nonstop. And when you would open it with that force, it would snap at the neck. And then we started to hear of injuries that members of the crew would start to get on their wrists, on their hand. And we heard of about 4 to 5. And, we heard that from a distribution partner who was actually kind enough to say, hey guys, look, this is happening. So we said, we need to be able to solve for this before something like this actually happens to anyone else. And hence, that's how the current bottle has happened. And that's our third bottle now.
Right. One question I have for you is, you literally gone from 0 to 100 on retail, right? On just learning about retail. Let's put it this way. Isn't that been a crazy experience? Because
100%. And which is why I'm, again, coming back to the fact that distribution is greater than product. We're in a physical look, touch, feel category. We're operating in beverage, and beverage isn't an easy category. It's actually a fairly difficult category. We're operating on a very, very premium price point that already has limited shelf space. But I think where we are today on where is the most relevant retail shelf for us in terms of sequentially which shelf do we want to enter, quick commerce is fairly interesting, especially for brands like us, because they can take you to multiple access points, multiple cities, because they're also sitting on a lot of data. I think when we launched, and this is right when quick com was also sort of taking off, we're a product that retails at an MRP on a 200 ml beverage at 125 rupees, right? If we were Sting at a 15, 20 rupee, it's a whole different ballgame, right? But we're not. We're 125. So we knew that if we wanted to get into retail really, really fast, it would be very, very expensive. But also, we now have heard of so many cases where for the optics of being able to actually go out and show that brands have booked revenue, you've appointed distributors, you've got the product on the shelf, right? You'll show that in one financial year.
Yeah.
And you'll time it so well, like we've heard of instances where they time it so well that the returns only come in the following year. So your credit notes are only issued the following year, right? So on modern trade as well, or even general trade, your job actually doesn't end at placement. Your job is liquidation. And that's how every single retailer even looks at it.
Right.
Which is either you wait it out for 10, 15, 20 years and build a KMF or a Nandini milk and become absolutely indispensable. Or if not, then you can't just go and dump your stock over there. You have to make your stock liquidate.
Right.
And that's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Money-wise, time-wise. And I think the moment that we learned this, and we knew that for the product to be picked up from the shelf, it needs to be a pull brand. And so we did two things. We did in 2022, we said we would focus on one vertical, which is Horeca, one city, which is Bangalore, and one product, which is cold brew.
Right.
That's it. Like a horse with blinkers, and not do anything else. While the end goal was retail, we also knew that we needed the product to get picked up on the retail shelf. So what we did was, to get the wet sampling to be done, we did two things. We covered about 120 workspaces in Bangalore, where Vijay and I would just take ice boxes filled with cold brew and get people to try it. It actually got to a point where I think that was the peak at which a co-working space was monetizing for brands to come in, to get access to their base. And I think in about the 3 to 4 weeks prior to that, we had been to so many offices, and so many of them were in this a particular co-working space, that by the end of it, there was a circular notified, sent out to all community managers saying, do not allow Bonomi to come in unless they pay. So I think somewhere, I'm going to find that photo for you. Vijay actually hosted a workspace sampling / tasting session at one of the employees who worked in this startup She opened up the boot of her car. We put the ice bucket over there, and then we did the sampling. So that was one thing. But the second thing that we did was we got into all of the coolest bars in Bangalore. And then we helped them liquidate the stock by actually creating, having the beverage as an RTD on their non-alcoholic section, adding it to their Swiggy Zomato menus, because that's a shelf in its own right. And then the third was actually using it in the application of cocktails and mocktails.
Right.
So in about 6 months, we listed in about 120 bars in Bangalore. And the result of that is us now actually, because of the pull it created, we only recently, a couple of weeks back, actually appointed a distributor partner in Bangalore who is now on a cash and carry with us.
Right.
So as soon as he picks up the stock from us, he pays us. But where we also help him is the partners that we work with, where the stock actually gets distributed. We ensure that he gets his payments on time.
Right. So a lot of mistakes in the process, right? Before you learn how.
I think a lot of learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you did make a lot of mistakes to part and parcel, I think, sort of come together, especially when you have no history of having worked in this line before, etc. And especially trying to crack modern and general trade, right? It's a whole other game in itself.
Yeah.
Very interestingly, you also raised money. What is that experience like? I remember being on 1 or 2 calls with you early in the days of 2020, but that was COVID. So I think everything was looked at differently.
Yeah.
And I think it changed.
Yeah.
And there was a boom.
Yeah.
And then there was also a winter. So very quickly from COVID to winter and the period of that we are in right now, it's been a quite fast journey, right?
Yeah.
What is that fundraising experience like?
So we've raised a very, very limited amount of capital for, I think, 2 reasons. One, I think we raised about 80% of the total capital that we've raised till date in the year 2022. That was, and it was about April or May. And that was the time when we had just completely transitioned to cold brew. We actually raised from Bonomi users. I think 70% of all of the capital we had raised was raised by Vardhman on Twitter. Yeah. He actually put out a tweet. He's known, I mean, he loves his coffee even now. What's your most expensive subscription? Netflix?
Maybe.
For VJ, it's coffee.
Yeah.
So he still, I think, spends about 2,500 or 3,000 rupees every month to get 2 bags of about 100 grams of coffee.
From?
Different roasters.
Oh, just trying out.
Yeah.
But now it's fine, right? It's like just testing out competition research. You can categorize it into whatever.
But I think the point I was trying to get to was that he sort of rightfully so became a very honest authority on coffee.
Yeah.
Right? And so in
just out of interest.
Just out of interest. And so in 22, I had reached out to, it was at the peak of all of the funding that was happening. We were absolutely naive to think that things like TAM, traction, would not matter. Right? Of course they matter. So we didn't raise from your typical large consumer fund. It would be easy to say because we didn't want to, but that's not true. They just weren't interested in it. You know, I had done 2 calls with a particular fund, and the person I had spoken to said, "Can you actually send samples of the product and tell my cook how to use it?" Right? And rightfully so, because that's just the nature of the product. So that was one. And hence then we took the call to raise from users. We raised on Twitter, and VJ actually led that. Yeah. And I think that's also just sort of helped build community for us, because a lot of them also got in because they were very, very strong advocates of the product.
Yeah.
And second, they were paying consumers of the product. So they also then now became shareholders for the product and the brand.
Very, I'm fascinated by this because I've never raised any funding, right? So I can't relate to it, let alone from customers, because now so it depends on what kind of customers. I don't know what the vetting process was, how you looked at them, but does anyone get involved in giving unauthorized feedback, or giving advice? Because they just start to feel like they own a piece of it, or they are you're liable to listen to them, right?
We've heard instances from a whole bunch of other friends or people in the network where it does happen. We've been fortunate so far that it hasn't happened.
It's also because maybe cold brew is a specialty product and not everyone's a VJ. But
no, but also today like we're not just cold brew, right? We've got the FMCG business, but more importantly, as of today, we've got the kiosk. But I think just generally it hasn't happened. Now, I think there's two reasons for that. One, the typical check that was invested by any of these people is not significantly large. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And hence there isn't that much of, what's happening. But I think the second one also is we've just been sort of fairly honest where we're just keeping everyone updated on here's what's happening. So I'm guessing that sort of answered everyone's questions. Yeah.
Right. And what is the reason to maybe just take a decision and go with users rather than a traditional VC or a fund?
We just couldn't. No one was
willing to put money.
Yeah.
Is it because of the funding window or just the product being
on the product on the TAM? We had just launched the product. We had just set up the factory, and we took a call on coming back to your earlier point, doing coffee in a tea drinking country, doing beverage, which in consumer fund is typically is a very difficult category. It had just come after, I think, about a year or two of what had happened with Raw. So for a whole bunch of factors, we on questions on TAM, on the price point, very premium. The memory of what had happened to Raw was fairly fresh. Beverage typically suffers from the fact we were now simple things, glass bottle, very high breakage on transit, very high logistics cost compared to average order value, right? Your typical to ship about 750 rupees worth of product, your typical logistics cost is about 150, 200 rupees. Look at that on skincare. It's about a 2,500 AOV with a shipping cost of about $50, right? So the nature of the category itself, and then within that category, the incredibly small TAM.
Has it changed though? Now with whatever relative success you've had over 4 years and the awareness that's there in the market, is there better interest or is there more, say, trust with maybe traditional VCs to maybe back something like this?
I think specifically on coffee as a category right now, 100% yes.
It's blowing up.
Yeah, I think the way that we're approaching it is just slightly different. Yeah, but just coffee as a vertical and coffee as a industry is massively growing. I mean, there's a number of global brands that have just entered in the last couple of weeks. I think Starbucks is now on they've opened 400 stores. And I think by 28, they want to get to about 1,000 stores. So yeah, very, very bullish on coffee.
Right. When you started to now, do you look at VCs differently?
In what way?
In just generally, like...
No, they're just...
Or you understand?
Yeah, like, I mean... Okay,
I get it.
I think, look, fundamentally, they're just human beings also doing another job. Now, the question is, what's the job and, what's their job and what do they have to achieve? I mean, fundamentally, anyone who's putting money, you can be a VC, you can be
a friend,
angel investor, you can be a friend. Everyone wants their money to make more money. Right? I don't think anything changes on how we look at any of these people. I think the way that we just approach any form of capital is very different. Like now, even when we do debt, and we're starting to do debt for the new stores that we're opening, for the new kiosks, but even if we do debt from friends and family, we do it with interest. It's just easier, it's better for all sides.
Right. Got it. If someone was to start off in the coffee business, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
I mean, again, there could be differences in the model of how you approach it. But if someone was to start off, would you recommend that they build it out as a profitable business, given what you've experienced? Or is going the VC route, does it make sense? And if so, then, and in what nature, what kind?
Okay. 100% yes, which is, and it's not just the coffee business. I'm saying, so let's say if it's coffee, we're assuming for the purpose of your question, a coffee shop.
Maybe. Yeah.
Sure. And then hence that would be Horeca.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm saying anyone who's operating in Horeca, I don't think the view changes. If you're starting it with two things. One, you're starting it without actually having an eye on profit or on profitability. One. And second, if you're starting it without enough working capital of 18 months of operating in Horeca, then don't do it. I think that needs to be the absolute first starting point. Which means then with that view, Then the question comes, do you want to raise equity capital or do you want to raise debt? So it's not so much VC versus angel.
Right. It's a mode or method of what you're trading off.
It's capital.
Right. So on that note, again, if you had to pick equity versus debt.
On current state?
Yeah.
Debt.
Right.
Debt. But that's also because now
you're maturing as a business.
Yeah.
You're maturing as founders. So, because same thing with me, right? If you had asked me when I was starting off and I had absolutely nothing, maybe I would have said, okay, maybe race against equity. But then again, I knew my business is not VC friendly or investment friendly. It's not that nature of a business. But if I was to start something else, I would have thought so. Unless you really, really know, right, that you can make it work. And all you need is an injection of cash for whatever. And then, you'll get the system right and you'll make it work. So it comes down to that awareness, confidence, and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
Because
I think
equity is the easy way out, I would say, in a way.
Not really.
If you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also do debt right now, let's say for this year, which should get us to X number of kiosks. And then future expansion might not need equity or debt. It could maybe just be a franchisee route. And hence, to get to that point of capital that we would then need for that phase of growth, equity would be better suited for it then versus today.
Right.
Which is why I would choose debt today.
Right. This is again an interesting question. I want to know your thoughts on this. Do you think you could have done this without a co-founder? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's centric to my state. I did have a co-founder at some point. He did exit the business, but it didn't affect me so much because I had early days where I started out on my own and then post that as well. There's only an in-between period. And I found it actually hard to work with a co-founder because he wasn't active in the business when I started. And then he was active for a period and then he was not. So for me, it made no difference. But do you think you could have done everything on Bonomi that you have?
No. But also, look, I was and I'm very fortunate that we have a mad scientist who's VJ, who's Vardhman. So that's definitely helped. We've worked together in the past.
But then both of you don't have any experience in the category. So did you at any point think that maybe I should get somebody in with a category experience?
Yes. And in fact, I think just about 2 weeks back, we actually had someone who works in a consumer fund and says, guys, listen, you've never done QSR earlier. Your next phase of growth, you will need a seasoned operator who's just done QSR. It needs to be someone who's just done 15, 20 years of QSR. And we were like, hell yes. And if and when that time comes, we look at it then.
Right. But is that easy to accept? Or is that there's a feeling inside saying, oh, maybe we've got it so far, we can get it from wherever we need to go?
No, I think where we are today, we know it. And we know that we will get to the point where we will 100% need an operator. In what capacity this operator joins is a whole different question, right? But someone who's just done QSR 15, 20 years, menu engineering, pricing, you want to get ahead of the curve, right? Yeah.
Got it. And how important is to have that dynamic sorted too? Because I'm assuming Vijay takes care of back end, the science of it. You take care of more of the front end. So was that easy to find in terms of sync? Did you work towards it? What would you tell an aspiring entrepreneur if they need to figure it out?
Figure out what?
The dynamics between what a co-founder does and what the other co-founder does. Because oftentimes there's overlap and then that kills a business, right? In the early stage, because everyone has an opinion on how it should be, especially if you run your own business.
Yeah.
Then, you don't play the roles properly. So both of you doing the same thing and that becomes counterproductive.
Right. Look, I think it's just very important to just get boundaries set, actually responsibility set, who does what, and have everyone, whether it's 2 co-founders or 4, align that you will essentially respect each other's decision and back each other up. It doesn't mean that we don't have arguments, but there's a time and place to have those arguments. There needs to be a method to the madness. But apart from that, eyes closed have to back each other up.
Right. And if I ask you, over the course of the last 4 years, what's been the single most hardest thing at Bonomi? What would that be? One thing over everything else. Because I don't think product was hard. A lot of people struggle with that, right? Because product is the most quintessential thing to nail. I think
distribution. Distribution. Yeah.
And how do you break into that? Because a lot of young entrepreneurs don't know this, but retail is a different. It's kind of guarded, right? You can't get into it unless You're able to convince and prove there's some pedigree.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of it is based on demand generation,
Right.
which is only done through advertising, which is expensive. If you don't have
Correct.
the money, you can't fund it.
Correct.
So it's a chicken and hen situation.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what's the easiest tip to somebody who wants to crack it? What's the lowest hanging fruit that you should go after?
But in what category?
Let's take any beverage for that matter. Maybe
or let's say FMCG.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number one, solve for TAM. Don't ignore TAM. Which is, if you want to hit PMF really fast, like the higher the TAM, at least you can test with the larger base.
Yeah.
Right? The second is, so this is how I think about it right now. You either go absolutely premium or go absolutely mass.
There's no in between.
Don't do in between. Which is, if you want to go absolutely mass, then build enough, raise enough to, let's say, at least have the ambition to take on Sting, if that's a category you want to operate with, right? But that's the level of saying I want to go absolute mass. At least it'll force you to say, okay, cool, how's Coke or Pepsi done this? Or you say, I'm going to go absolute premium, because if you see everything that's happening right now in the last couple of months, everything around consumers is just building towards premiumization. So this in between, it also leads to a little bit, sort of lack of focus, because you're neither here, you're neither there. So I think that's my second point. One is TAM, B is be absolute mass or absolute premium. Choose. And both have to be built very, very differently.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Finish.
And I think my third is understanding that anything that's consumer, anything that's physical, look, touch, feel, whether you're creating a new category or whether you're entering an existing one, takes time to build, and there is no growth hack around it, where you can expect to throw capital and for it to have very, very high adoption and very high retention at the same time. So you need to absolutely be patient and respect the process. And I think these are just my 3 points.
Right. And if you were to compare the mass and the premium game, at least in our country, is one easier than the other?
No.
The same?
Yeah.
Different challenges?
Yeah.
Like, if any examples?
I think even on the premium side, distribution is not easy. Because there's the real estate around it, be it digital or physical, is just that much more limited.
Yeah. And an example is maybe the platforms that you would list in, for example, right?
Yeah.
Is radically different for premium products versus mass.
Yeah.
And that, because your audience is in different places, and that has its own back-end costs and process and logistics that come with it.
Correct. On the mass segment, it still requires a shelf. It's just a very, very different shelf.
Right.
Be it digital or physical, it's a very different shelf. But it's possibly about 1,000x more number of shelves, right? And even that has a very high barrier to entry. So I wouldn't say one's easier than the other. I just think now, though, with everything that's happening around premiumization, for someone who wants to start out and build a brand in that category, it's a great time to start out and build one.
There's another thing I want to ask you, which is about hiring. In startups where you're very lucky, fortunate, spoiled, whatever the adjective that you want to use, but you often attract the cream of the cream in terms of talent, right? And that's a very different pay scale.
Yeah.
Like ludicrous, to be honest, because I think I don't know if you can call it a bubble, because I think it's maybe lasted beyond what a bubble would probably, but it's a very different world to what a dhanda is, for that matter. Coming from those startup ecosystems, I also, think that your network is that, right? Typically, you know people from there. Very difficult to hire someone from there to come and work in a dhanda business like this in the early days when you're starting off. And you also need a lot of blue collar workforce. How did that go about? How did you, have you figured what is the kind of talent? I know the story, we've discussed about it, but just for the sake of, the people watching and listening, how do you go about that? How do you figure out what's the kind of workforce you need? Where do you get it from? That template, that training, there's a whole process, right?
Yeah.
How did you figure that out, or what is the process of figuring that out?
Look, it's not a playbook that doesn't exist. We're not the first brand to do this. We're not going to be the last. I think there are way too many success stories of brands or businesses that have started in the last 5 years that have built it to about 100 crore to 500 crore. Fundamentally, though, I think the turning point for us came when I at least stopped thinking of this as a quote unquote startup and started thinking of it as an FMCG business. Now, the moment you say, I'm in an FMCG business, the skill set required is very, very different.
Right.
And then also the skill sets that you don't require is very different. Like, for example, today, I wouldn't necessarily build marketing in-house. I think marketing should be, for us, agency-driven. Or even if not agency, just outsourced. But one of our most important functions will be sales moving forward. That's one. Let me give you another example. With the kiosks opening up, we're actually no longer in the coffee business. We're in the real estate business. Right? Because now we're fighting for 200, 250 square feet space with about 100 other QSR brands across categories. It could be someone selling samosa. It could be someone selling chai. It could be someone selling cupcakes. Right? So for me, we need to then have a very, very strong person on real estate.
Right.
Who then potentially has great relationships with from your unorganized broker segment to a CBRE. I think even the skill set within a category is very different from what you would typically need at a startup versus this. Salaries are 100% different.
Was that a culture shock? I know we spoke about it a bit, but coming from that ecosystem to outside, and then were you like shocked by the fact that it can be done for this kind of a number or this kind of a salary?
100%. 100%.
You don't realize that when you're at CRED and Dunzo and Uber, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I am now sort of just a big believer in the whole variable pay. Now, it can either be as a function of equity, it can be, there's multiple ways to do it. There is enough workforce entering every year. I think all of us just need to have the patience to actually speak to these people. Like, for example, you've met him, but I'll give you an example. Our oldest team member, his name is Aleem. He's, I think, now been with us 4 years.
Yeah.
Right? He today heads sales for for a vertical, which is actually not even coffee, but he had sales for that. The first time I met him, he came and knocked on this door. I had ordered cigarettes on Dunzo, and Aleem came and delivered it. And then he stayed back and said, if there's any work, but that's how Aleem happened. But I think, irrespective of what segment of people join your teams, I think the one takeaway, and this is coming back to the Dunzo point on just empathy. I think if we're with teams and build teams the right way, people attract people, right? And so today, since we don't contract manufacture, and we've got our own brewing, which means we've got our own factory, which means we've got our own teams at that level. Aleem got Kamrul. Kamrul is Vijay's right hand on brewing. He understands how to cup coffee, maybe better than anyone else. Kamrul got someone by the name of Najmul earlier. Najmul used to do all of our deliveries in the city before we appointed a distributor partner. So yeah, and today Aleem actually heads sales for us on one of the product verticals in Horeca.
Right. I can't get past one of those things you said, that you do marketing for you as agency or advertising, right?
I think that's my view today. I think it's because for a few reasons, I think now more than ever, it's continuously evolving. B, I mean, marketing is generally continuously evolving. B, and I think this is a conversation we had some time back as well, which is, if you look at liquor companies, you look at a Diageo, you've got so many different labels, so many different brands. And typically a Diageo would not work with one agency for all their brands, right? Yeah. You'd want to split that because you'd want fresh ideas. You want fresh approach to come in.
And I also think the variable for those brands and for Bonomi as well is creativity.
Yeah.
Whereas if you ask me as a B2B business, I'll always have it in-house. Because my variable is actually not creativity. It's efficiency.
Right.
Because I think for me, what I would need to do to convince a customer is radically different, because I think the engagement nature of it, the price point, the sales cycle is very different from a B2C product, especially one which is at the kind of price point that is yours, or even lower for that matter. So if I was doing any kind of FMCG business, no doubt I would do advertising outside.
Yeah.
While keeping some fundamentals in so that you have some sync.
Yeah.
But B2B, I would only do it in house.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I wouldn't have thought this way 5 years, 6 years back.
Same.
Yeah. It's just
we've tried building marketing internally. I think it's the same thing of it. If you do it, you either go 100 or don't do it.
Yeah. And it's tough to go 100.
It's tough to go 100.
It is too much investment on it. Unnecessary, I think, overload on payroll, which is not fundamental and core to the business.
I also think it's a very timing related scenario, right? At what stage of the organization do you want to build when?
Yeah.
But I also think just given the amount of talent that today exists, sitting out of different places in the city, getting access to all of that talent to join you full time with a whole bunch of today's workforce that want to be solopreneurs and go to different co-working spaces. All the more reason that I would actually outsource it today.
Yeah. I also think it's function of your business model. Like, very funny. Last week I went to a university. I did a 30-minute seminar of sorts, right? I had nothing prepared. I just walked in and I said, what questions do you have? And just answered it. Best form of, I think, interaction with students at least. And someone asked me this. So everyone's fascinated about CRED. Everyone's like, oh, CRED ads, it's a cool brand, this, that, right? And they had a lot of questions on where it's going. I mean, I don't know where it's going, but I sort of gave my pointers. Very interestingly, I put it across to them. And I think this is something I've come to understand. And I read a LinkedIn post from this guy, Atomberg fans, the founder. He's very insightful, right?
Yeah, phenomenal operator.
I'm assuming you would have learned Arindam, I think.
Yes.
You would have
his very insightful tweets.
Yeah. So this theory that we've had internally at Virality for a while, I didn't know how best to articulate. I had my own ways of comparing it to pyramids and stuff like that, like all marketing folks do. But he put it across very well. He said, if you're a sub 100 CR brand, forget the brand building aspect.
Yeah.
Focus on distribution.
Yeah.
Distribution brings customers, and then later on you go back to brand building once you have your foot and your base strong, which is very nice. When I compare any of the startups that have come in, like a Zomato for that matter, right? Or a Swiggy or even Dunzo, I think they're built on distribution first approach.
Correct.
Right? It's
correct.
Because fundamentally the business thrives on how many users do you have, because that's what gives valuation, which gives funding and investment. And then as a result of which, the objective of growth, which is what marketing is camouflaged as, becomes to get as many number of users.
Yeah.
And that's a distribution first approach.
Yeah.
Whereas any FMCG works on the principle of what does my brand do to you when you interact with us.
Right.
And I think it's a fundamental top-down approach of this is the feeling.
Yeah.
Everything revolves around this feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very, very different.
Yeah.
So I think it depends also on this, how you're approaching.
Yeah.
So if you, I think, were a pure D2C brand, for example, I think you would be better off building a team in-house.
Yeah. Sure.
Versus if you're all formats of distribution.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a retail.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think D2C honestly is not a business, it's a channel. But irrespective, anything on FMCG, and just coming back to the earlier point, your earlier question on if someone today were to start a business on FMCG, what would be the things to keep in mind? I had given you 3 points, but there's actually a fourth, which is have very, very solid capital in the bank, because India does not pay.
True.
You will write off a significant amount, depending on your category, on bad debt every year. You will not be able to recover money in India.
Right. Especially for your nature of business, right? Where you deal with trade, which is very different.
Yeah.
B2B is still a little better.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, everything has its own set of challenges, but in our category, to operate on a ZCS, which is zero credit sale, is close to impossible. Right? But to help you understand, specifically within coffee on FMCG, and just breaking it down, for this bottle that we will manufacture in the month of June, we have already paid for the coffee last year. Right? Now, a bottle gets made in June. By the time it hits a shelf, that invoice will only be generated sometime in August.
Yeah.
Right? And sure, you've signed an agreement on a stamp paper that says my payment terms are 30 days.
Doesn't happen.
Good luck, mate. Right? So August 1, let's say you've raised an invoice. You're not getting the payment before October if you're lucky.
Yeah. If you're lucky. Worst case, bleeds into the next year, right?
Which means that on the FMCG business, it's a very, very high working capital requirement that only increases as your revenue or your top line increases.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed to cover that point, but that was just...
No, I think of it this way. You're not a big enough business if you don't have outstanding.
Yeah.
Literally. Because this is one of my things my dad told me, one of the few advices he gave. He said, 20% of your profits you'll never realize every year.
It's booked on your...
Yeah, it's booked, but you don't realize it. You don't get it.
It's never in the bank.
Yeah. And initially I was like, no way, this, that. And then it started to happen, right?
Yeah.
As you grow, it starts. And then what's a 2 lakh, for example, in a couple of years based on your growth is 20 lakhs. In terms of outstanding, for example.
Yeah.
Again, B2B, because the tickets are fewer, size volume is bigger. So then I think there's a trade-off there. But yeah, I think any business in India probably goes through this, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm assuming this can also kill businesses, right?
100%. So now we're getting into a business, we're calling it a coffee business, but fundamentally we're in the real estate business. Before this, we were not in the FMCG business. We were in the cash flow business, which is it's a cash flow game. If you can figure out cash flow, how to manage your cash flow, you can win. And if you can't,
Yeah, no doubt. Are there any other brands of coffee in the market that you really like? Competition? You want to admit on camera that there are brands that you consume or that you...
100%. I still go to, when I'm on the road, I will still go to a third wave many times and have a cold fashion. It was my first introduction to cold brew. I don't think anything changes. I think the other one is now with us getting into kiosks and cafes and QSRs, I absolutely enjoy visiting a whole bunch of them and across different categories. Like, for example, I think one of that comes to mind, which is done really well, is Samosa Party, the one on 12th Main, right below third wave. So I think they've done that really well. But am I drinking coffee other than mine? Always.
Right.
All the time.
Is there any brand that threatens you? Look at it and say, oh, fuck, they have a great product. They could give us a run for the money.
It's not so much a threat, but I think there's a very high amount of respect for what Blue Tokai has been able to accomplish. And actually also for what they continue to stick to, if you look at a lot of their menu at a lot of their cafes. It's still just a lot of conventional forms of coffee versus what we typically find at a whole bunch of other brands is a lot of, like us, a lot of, let's say, vanilla, hazelnut, caramel. So Blue Tokai, for one, that's a brand. I know Vardhman looks up to, so do I, just for what they've been able to accomplish and how they've been able to accomplish. I think Sabco in Bombay, I'd really, really admire how they've been able to leverage brand.
Explain, like how?
If you look at even all of the cafes, just the way they've applied principles of merchandising to how the cafe is set up, communication, storytelling on all of their content pieces, it's super, super engaging. Collaborations and partnerships, that's positioning, that's brand positioning. For example, I think recently I came across a piece of content where they've just opened a shop-in-shop in a really cool bar in Delhi, which is India's #1 bar. So even just how they approach brand and how to leverage brand and how to implement it on their day-to-day is something that I actually really admire.
So what's next for Bonomi?
We are opening grab-and-go coffee kiosks. We've just opened one a few weeks back. We're opening the second one in a couple of weeks in Bangalore. I think the goal is to solve for an everyday coffee. And so we sell cappuccinos and cold coffees at 49 rupees to about 69, 79. I think the last 4 years of Bonomi from a manufacturing perspective has also helped us build a solid backward integration. So we've sort of set up these kiosks, keeping in mind that if we want to be able to scale this to about 100, how do we do it without being dependent on a lot of skilled labor? How do we do it by having absolute cost control so that we still make money on every cup of coffee that we sell at, even at 25 rupees, which is something that we do. We sell a filter coffee at 25 rupees at our kiosk at Manyata Tech Park.
Right.
So that's the plan right now. That's where the immediate focus is on, and to open the next 20, 30 set of kiosks.
Right. Got it. Any last piece of advice that you may have for anyone budding entrepreneur, actually in any category, any field? What do you think? Because I think you've been...
I think, I mean, my only thing is this: very, very bullish on the India growth story, at least in the consumer space. Everything that we're reading, at least in the last 6-8 months, is conducive to the next couple of years being very, very high growth. It's the best time to get into consumer. Especially if it's a physical look, touch, feel product, there possibly might not be a better time in the future. How you do it, all of that is secondary, but it's just a great time this decade to do it. So don't think twice.
Great. On that note, thanks a lot, dude. Finally, after 18 months of pestering and rejections and
not at all.
Sales calls,
Thank you.
This has finally happened.
Thank you for convincing me to muster up the courage and do this.
No doubt. I hope this is the start of many. We'll do a lot more of these. I think once in 6 months. Because that's how frequent we, generally, a lot more frequent than that.
Yeah.
But I think those conversations I have with you typically, before we even started recording, I think were very insightful. Sometimes we sort of go through that.
Yeah.
And I think a candid approach next time will I'll already be seated, you'll come and sit, and then we'll start. I think we should start rolling from there. And I think there'll be a lot of nuggets that people find interesting.
Yeah, I think this one is 4 years of Bonomi.
Trying to compress it is hard.
Yeah. But I think 6 months out, we would have also had a few more kiosks.
Yeah.
And a lot more
data.
Interesting consumer
insights.
For sure.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you, man.